Welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Very excited about today's guest. We've got Amit Vohra with us. Amit is currently the CEO and co-founder, really exciting company, neuro42, which we're going to be talking about today. He's also president, CEO, and co-founder of Promaxo, which has a similar type technology from an MRI standpoint as neuro42, and then also co-founder and director of an extremely cool company called 8 Chili Inc., which is a VR metaverse platform with seemingly countless healthcare uses. Thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming onto the show.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you inviting me here. Looking forward to a fun discussion.
Absolutely. Well, as I've discussed with you earlier, the show, your background is one that's incredible to say the least. You've got a tremendous background, and we'll definitely weave in some of your background throughout the show. But as you know, this show's really, the goal of this show is to really highlight the cool technology that you guys are bringing to market, the bleeding edge technology that you guys are bringing. The company is, I believe, you guys are a Series A funded company. You guys took your Series A last year.
Yeah, we did Series A. We've also done a bridge to B now.
Okay.
Closed about a few weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
I guess in short, what I will do is just kind of read the canned statement for what Neuro42 is doing, but then I'll open it up to you and you can kind of give an overview of the product. Well, I guess we'll start with the product here and kind of give some background to exactly what it is, and we'll get into that. But Neuro42 is developing the first of its kind portable AI-powered robotic MRI platform. I think you guys got all the requisite buzzwords in there, which will allow physicians to diagnose brain injury in acute settings and treat neurological diseases intraoperatively under the live imaging. Just if you can, give us a snapshot of the product, exactly kind of what it is you guys are building, how it functions in contrast to maybe a traditional MRI.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're starting out with our main platform, which is a portable, compact MRI that, if you look at it, it's about 150 pounds or so, can be placed in any kind of a neuro suite or in an outpatient setting as well. But what we're doing is we're making this MRI more flexible and adaptable. So you just don't use it only for imaging. You're also able to do interventions under it for a neurosurgeon. So that's where the robotics piece comes in, the artificial intelligence comes in. We do imaging. We use the robot to perform brain biopsies, look at epilepsy guidance, potentially even look at shunt insertions and everything. That there is nothing available currently to do that under live MR. And then finally, as we keep collecting baseline data on patients, which is raw imaging data, start correlating it to procedural data, that's where it really kicks in, where artificial intelligence can do computer-aided diagnostics, can do predictive analysis, can really look at adaptive treatment planning as well. So when you look at the whole ecosystem, we can manage the patient journey all the way from a patient comes in and we do a diagnostic scan to all the way to taking them through a procedure and then post-procedure management as well. So in a way, we don't use those buzzwords lightly. We have the MR itself licensed in. It's a technology that was developed at Harvard Medical School, MIT, MGH. We just brought in a new robot. You're going to see a press release on it over the next week or so that was exclusively licensed in from Johns Hopkins University as well. So, the elements are all there now where we have working prototypes and we're kind of taking it through the whole process of building the product, taking it through FDA, and then most importantly, using it on patients.
The concepts that we talk about on this show, this podcast, are pretty, we get into some pretty heady stuff. I use that term in jest, I guess, because a lot of it is neuro related. But
Yeah.
But these are pretty complex topics that I like to have my guests break it down so that guys like me that aren't that bright can understand it. So let's kind of hyperanalyze this. So you've got that it's a portable MRI.
Yep.
And it can function like a traditional MRI, taking a traditional MRI scan. built into the console itself will be a robot that could be simultaneously or after the fact utilized uh, for dexterity purposes intraoperatively?
I think that's a good point, right? So yes, first of all, the MRI itself can image. I mean, it's a low field MRI, fraction of the size, fraction of the field strength. So we have to play some tricks to get the image quality to the level where it's acceptable to the community. And we've already published that. The images on humans have been published in both Journal of MRI, even Nature Biomedical as well. But then the next step, what we're doing is within this MR, we're creating accessibility ports or openings where robotic tools can come in under live image guidance. Now, there's steps to it, right? I mean, one is you could do confirmatory scans after you've done a procedure, but you could also do intraoperative scans. If you look at how brain procedures are done today or a brain biopsy, it's not done live because there is no real imaging modality. So you go in, you do a tumor resection, and then you basically use pathology to confirm if the margins are have been uh, or the tumor has been removed to the margins that you require. Uh, this way, instead of kind of going through that pathway, now you could do confirmatory scans during the procedure. So it adds a lot of efficiency to the procedure, but more importantly, creates a more targeted approach for different treatments. Final piece of the puzzle is as you keep doing these intraoperative scans and you're collecting more and more data on the patients and you've removed, let's say, a tumor and you've then done a confirmatory scan, you can then manage the patient post treatment as well because you have the baseline pre treatment, you have the post treatment confirmatory scan, and then you can see if the tumor is removed 98% or whatever the end outcome is. So in a way, it creates a pretty nice workflow for a physician as well to manage everything live. Now, because MRIs have temporal resolution, which is different than let's say an ultrasound would be or something, live is something that would still be like maybe a few seconds where you're looking at image to image co-registration, but that's something we've done a lot with our previous startups to be able to use previous images and then co-register them to the to the live images to see if anything has moved and how the organs have shifted and everything. So I think it's a fun project to work on. We've gotten buy-in from big neurosurgeons. We did fair bit of primary market research on this before we jumped into this project, and there was very high likelihood for surgeons and neuroscientists to use this the way we envision it to be used.
Just in kind of walking through the workflow of a procedure and the way patients are typically managed. So I think this happens a fair amount where a surgeon does an MRI, identifies a tumor, goes in, resects the tumor. They take margins. They can send that out, and pathology can give them preliminary margins during the case, essentially,
Yes.
right? But that doesn't always. That's not always like that. They can't confirm that until they do extensive analysis on that. Which, if it comes back, oh, we thought we had
Yeah.
margins, but turns out we don't have margins, then they got to wheel that patient all the way back into
Yeah. No.
surgery, do a whole entirely new procedure, and then hope they got the margins at that point. Would that be one of the use cases for what you guys are targeting?
No, absolutely. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. The problem currently is there's no live imaging. So you're using a pre-operative scan, and the surgeon is using his cognitive abilities to use that to remove the tumor. Once the tumor has been resected, they're sending it to pathology. That takes about 20 minutes to maybe get preliminary data back that the margins are fine, and then you do the procedure, close the patient, and then you send them for a confirmatory scan after that. And these procedures, as you know, can take anywhere from 4 hours to 12 hours. So they're
Yeah.
complex procedures. Uh, if you can provide an intraoperative scanner to them, which they can use once or multiple times during the procedure, it adds a lot of confidence to the procedure. But secondly, it also starts creating a workflow which is more targeted, more efficient as well. And that's one of the use cases. Now, as you start going into epilepsy guidance, there's no real good tool available today to do epilepsy guidance.
Yeah.
If you can use imaging for that, that's another big use case.
For like deep brain stimulation and whatnot.
Deep brain stimulation is a tough one as well, where you have to kind of understand the resolution, like also look at the contrast and everything. But that's something we'll explore on the research side as well. We're working with a couple of big name researchers at UC Berkeley to look at epilepsy and DBS. But yeah, I mean, the use cases are significant on the neurosurgical side. Shunt insertions on pediatric, even adult applications. Currently, it's all done, with no real live imaging. But even post shunt insertions to look at any kind of fluid buildup in the shunts, you can now do it as an outpatient procedure with an MR. So I think there's a lot of applications that as we started looking at this market and started talking to the end users, uh, the technology can really revolutionize how procedures are done. And what it allows us to do is on one side, we can work with stereotactic navigation tools and provide live imaging. On the other side, we can provide robotic interventions with live imaging as well. So in a way, we cover both sides of the equation, and we try to create a platform which is all encompassing. Rather than, hey, we'll provide you the imaging and then you kind of figure out how to do stereotactic navigation from there. So I think that's the exciting part as well, that we did not want to stop with just the imager. We wanted to take it a step further and do the more complex thing, which is do interventions directly under the imager as well.
Yeah, no, the vertical integration of that procedure, any type of procedure, anytime you can vertically integrate it, within one system, it's, that in theory, an amazing thing. So, what specifically is the robotic component of the product? Is it is it a true extension of the physician's hands, like a Da Vinci robot or the Rosa or anything, or is it a different type of robotic component?
Yeah, no, I think you'll start seeing it in the next couple of months as we start showing pictures of the robot and everything. But it's a compact robot, about like 12 to 18 inches, uh, and it's an MR compatible robot that can provide needle guidance, can also provide guidance for specific ablation tools. And the goal is, currently no brain biopsies are performed because it's not live. So why was the idea of doing a brain biopsy?
Right.
So we can open up that pathway of, before opening up a patient, now you can do a brain biopsy, which is targeted with a robot. And that kind of creates a nicer step where you might not even need to, or you might create a much more targeted focal approach to treatment. That's the first step to it. Second step is when you yourself was talking about DBS and epilepsy and all that and PDE, you need immense accuracy. And at this point, when you talk about even stereotactic navigation tools, uh, once you open up the brain shifts by more than a centimeter. So in a way, you're losing all the perspective.
Ah.
And you can have the best imaging or you could have the worst imaging, but your resolution is dependent on the brain shift. And then it's up to the physician to use a fiducial, whether it's the brain stem or something, to correct for it, right? If you have robotic coordinates, which are directly correlated to our imaging coordinates, we absolutely know where to go.
Right.
And even if things move around, we can do image to image co-registration. We always know the physical coordinates of the robot, so we can go in more accurately. And even though imaging might not provide all the information, imaging with external fiducials and robot provides this, combined accuracy, which you won't see with one or the other. So
Yeah.
in a way, when you look at, that's why it's integral to, I mean, yes, the imager will be the first product cleared, to start doing diagnostic imaging for stroke management and other stuff as well. But where we see the biggest bang for the buck is when you have this combined platform ready, because now you can see how this really impacts. Because I can create an accurate pathway to perform procedures, whether it's a brain biopsy or a guidance for a specific neuro procedure. So I think that's the whole goal. And as artificial intelligence comes in, it becomes extremely critical, right? I go in, I take an image, I have raw imaging data. I might not know whether this is a malignancy. I don't know if this is something which is something I need to correct for or treat right now. But once I have ground truth on it, which comes in either from a brain biopsy or comes in from uh, a treatment procedure as well, now I can keep using that ground truth to keep making our AI algorithms more intelligent. So now they can start predicting, right? I can say, hey, I don't know if this is a stage 4 malignancy, but I do know that something suspicious is here. And I think you should go in and take a sample. Or I think you should go in and do a procedure there. So I think that's where we want to end up with this. And that's why this holy grail.
That's more of a predictive medicine approach of, in the past, when we've seen things that look like this X, Y, and Z tumor, it's turned out to be ABC 90% of the time or 80% of the time, which would then justify, like you said, a biopsy or whatever therapeutic or diagnostic procedure needed, right?
And that's exactly what we want to do, right? So we're collecting raw imaging data. We want to collect procedural data, patient baseline data on every patient. So hugely data driven. We don't, and that's why when we're building this product, the idea is all our data gets stored into either like our health cloud, which is hosted on AWS or Google or Microsoft. And that's one of the reasons why some of these companies like Huami/Zep Health have invested in us, because they really want to leverage our unique data lakes along with their patient data that is more on the consumer side, and see what trends could they see with this specific unique raw imaging components. So I think it starts becoming a pure digital play where you can manage a patient, put them on active surveillance, kind of look at post-treatment management of a patient as well, all through what the baseline was on a patient to what the procedure was, and then how do you keep managing it from there on. And I think that's why the vision is not just to sell the scanner and sell the robot. The vision is to continue to collect more and more data that makes our algorithms more intelligent and more targeted for doing both computer-aided diagnostics as well as predictive analysis.
Yeah, no, it's we in this space we often talk about category creation, right? And it's for physicians, they really get excited when you create a new procedure. If you're able to go, if they can't currently go in and take a biopsy real time with live imaging, and then all of a sudden you guys get FDA approval and they can, that changes the game for them. That changes not just how they do the procedure, but how they manage the patient. Through the continuum of care. So that's exciting stuff. What was product challenge creating this product development with something like this where it's never been done before? That's not a small task. What was the single biggest challenge you guys have faced so far in creating it? Was it the actual creation of the algorithms? Was it the tying it all in? What was the challenge?
So I think the biggest challenge is MRIs have never been used for navigation or guidance. All the 510K clearances have all been about, hey, we're gonna image, we're gonna have these sequences, and we're gonna have the nicest looking images for you, and then you do what you want to do with it, right? And that's great, but what it does is it restricts MRIs to hospital settings, and it doesn't really make it a navigation tool like ultrasounds are or fluoroscopy is. So what ends up happening today is, yes, we use MRIs for pre-operative treatment planning, but we really don't use it for treatment at all. To kind of create that shift where, hey, let's create an MRI that could be used for guidance was a tough one. And the experience we had at Promaxo really helped, because when we went to FDA and said, hey, we want to look at prostate cancer guidance with an MRI that's portable, their first reaction was, are you crazy or what? I mean, first of all, it's hard enough to see better images with a low field, but you're also
Right.
saying, hey, I want to go, guide to a cancer as well and treat a cancer or do whatever. So it created a new set of validation protocols for us, which is not typical of an MRI. Those validation protocols were, hey, show us navigation accuracy under an MR, do a comparative study to standard of care, which is ultrasound, show that you can show all that, and we were able to get a clearance there, which was astounding to people that with a low field, single-sided or a small portable configuration, you could now create lesion delineation and lesion localization within a gland. And now with brain, it's slightly easier because images are a lot nicer. The pathway is a lot clearer. But now we also have predicates, right? I mean, we have Promaxo as a predicate in where we found a way to navigate. On the diagnostic side, we have Hyperfine as a predicate. But what we have now is, on one side, we can use Hyperfine just for imaging. On the other side, we've done something that nobody has done, and we got a 510K on navigation that could use now we use as a predicate in exploring this. So I would think the biggest challenge was creating a product that had the right regulatory pathway and buy-in from FDA as well in the agency. And I have to give it to the agency. I mean, they were very nice. I mean, they took their time. But they understood what we wanted to do. They figured out that it could create an impact, and they figured out a way to give us a clearance. And I think that's the exciting part about it. Not just creating a new clinical pathway, but also to get a buy-in from all the stakeholders that allowed us to create a product that could be used on patients. And uh, the early clinical data on that side showed that we're doing what we're doing is creating an impact in our clinical studies. And we expect the same here because of anecdotally knowing how this is done and what it could do. So
Right.
I think that's the exciting part. Of course, I mean, when you're doing this, there's a lot of challenges on the product development side. When you're creating accessibility ports within a MRI, you're creating non-uniformities, non-linearities. You have to correct for all of that. So it becomes a very difficult MR physics problem to solve. Uh, so that's why we got a lot of excitement from the top three imaging corporate strategics as well, who've seen us deliver. So now they're like, okay, we want to work with you guys rather than reinventing the wheel again. Because,
Right.
I mean, the cool thing is we're not really competing with MRIs because you can't really bring a conventional MRI to a neuro suite unless you're Emirates or you kind of have this complicated pathway. An MRI company, a typical MRI company now can move into outpatient procedures, can move into neurosurgical procedures, and it kind of gets sold through surgical oncology, not as much through MR.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's not traditional MR, but it's not far. It's a 15-degree pivot, right? You took
Yeah,
traditional and pivoted a bit, and then you add in the robot and the AI and all that. Now you're looking at a significant pivot. But yeah, no, it's neat that that's not redundant to those big companies, because then you've got the power of them behind you. They're probably pulling for you guys to be successful.
exactly. I mean, we're not really competing with MRs. We're indirectly competing with the ultrasounds of the world, or to some extent, fluoroscopy. And I think the exciting thing there is you could still use an ultrasound. It's cheap enough. You get higher temporal resolution, but you don't have the 3D view. So you really won't be able to do everything with an ultrasound. So you could use the MRI and maybe use an ultrasound if you need to. So it doesn't completely replace it, or it does, depending on the
Right.
procedure. And fluoroscopy is absolutely useless in this case, which, I mean, unless you're doing something which is CT guided, on the brain side, I don't think you want to use fluoroscopy too much.
It's a more adjunctive and complementary to most of the existing whatever you'd call it, standard of care.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's. I mean, in a way, it's disruptive, but it's not that disruptive that these guys can't implement it in their workflow. But what it does is it does simplify their workflow as well and create some efficiency there that they could now use live MR. I mean, everybody wants to use MRI. It's not like they don't, because the whole launch of Emirates' platform and NeuroPoint, ClearPoint Neuro, and all that was to be able to use an MRI with navigation. The problem is you're still using a 1.5 Tesla, you're still using a 3 Tesla, and it's so hard to put a patient in there, and then so hard to put a robotic tool in there. It's almost impossible. And it just creates this convoluted workflow that nobody wants to deal with. So, and then you're adding costs. You have a $20 million infrastructure built up with Imres, where you're moving this whole scanner around and doing everything. Sounds great in principle. It's just not a very efficient process. So
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, I get it. What where are you guys at in the regulatory process? I mean, obviously, it's probably going to be a cadence of first the MR, and then uh, depending on the functioning of the functionality of or interoperative AI. But what did you get approval for the MR already, and or where are you at with the different stages?
yeah, so we have our first prototypes built in house right now. We just are filing our IRBs to do clinical images in house, away from the academic setting. So, and this will kind of drive into our 510K package build up early next year. So, we are looking to send everything to the agency within the next year or so. And then hoping, that it's a fast one. We can get something within 4 to 6 months from there on. But in the past, we've seen the process take up to 9 months. So, I mean, we're not going to give exact timelines, but we're looking at probably end of 2023, early 2024 as our first clearance. And then simultaneously, we're building the robot and our interventional MRI in the background. We've filed patents, we're doing simulations on building the prototypes as well. And that creates the second 510K, whether it comes in as a robot independently or a robot with MRI. We'll have to sit with the agency and kind of have a couple of pre-subs to understand how they want to proceed with it. But overall, I mean, having played in this space now, having worked in low field, having gotten a clearance uh, with our other startup, we feel a lot more comfortable in the regulatory pathway than, let's say, then so
You have the blueprint.
exactly. And I mean, the agency knows us as well, that we kind of got a clearance, and we worked with them and showed them what they wanted to see. So we also know what to show them, right? That's another thing. Like, we can go in and say, hey guys,
They're gonna ask for X, Y, and Z. Let's get it ready for them and just give it to them. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, instead of now going to them and asking for X, Y, and Z, we also know X, Y, and Z. So now they might ask for Z dash, which is another like 10% more, but it's not like we're going in blinded. Because when we went in the first time around to go and say, hey, we have a portable MRI, we want to use it for guidance, when nobody has ever gotten that clearance, it was interesting. And that took a while, but we got a clearance. So now we know what the pathway is. And I mean, it helps to create the product the right way, the 510K package the right way, and have the right pre-submitting with it.
Absolutely. It's when I got into the business late '90s, it was the FDA just it was such an adversarial environment between the industry companies and the FDA, and it was just like this power struggle, and the FDA kept you in the dark as much as possible till the very end. And it's really cool to see that there's been this collaborative effort now where they and I don't want to put that negative spin solely on the FDA either. In the past, I mean, it was neither industry nor the FDA were finding ways to work well with each other, but it seems like now there's just the FDA is like you know really craving that collaborative effort with people like yourselves and the Promaxos of the world, where they want to see these technologies come to market. They want whereas maybe before they were looking for a reason not to approve it, now they're looking for reasons to approve it, with protocols in place to make sure that there's
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. I mean, we were surprised with the interactions we had with FDA. They were refreshing.
yeah,
Doesn't mean you don't have to do all the stuff to get the safety profile in place, or you need to show, your effectiveness of the device as compared to the standard of care and the predicates. But at the end of the day, it's clear when you know what they're looking for, right? And you can kind of strive towards answering their questions. And what was very refreshing is the people who came in from FDA's review committee. They were extremely knowledgeable. Those were people. Some of them had come from industry themselves, so they understood. But I mean, we completely understand where FDA is coming from as well. They want the product to be safe. They want the product to not just be worse than what is out there. So I
right.
think those are absolutely fair questions to ask, and what it needs to get to that endpoint. Once you talk to the panel, you talk to the reviewers, and it's nice. I mean, there's always some open-ended discussion there, which is expected, because once something is novel, you really don't know the answer completely either. So I think there's always some back and forth that happens. But it's good to have those conversations, because if you don't have the conversations, I mean,
For
it's just
sure.
hard to, yeah. I don't think the industry is like, I would think like most of the startups want to get to a clearance ASAP, and then FDA also needs to kind of keep them in check, because
Right.
you need to show the data to get to the end point. Uh, so I think it was a very interesting discussion. I was part of all these meetings with the FDA as well. So in a way, it was kind of nice to be a part of that and actually contribute into the discussion as well. Uh, and I mean, I'm not going to go into the specifics of all the discussions that happened, but they were very, very refreshing.
Is he? I mean, what was this going on during the pandemic? Was all of this happening?
Yeah, that was another interesting part for us. I mean, we got our clearance at Promaxo in March of 2021, and the whole discussions were happening from February of 2019 to, so all meetings were WebExes. There was nothing happening in person. We had to do studies during the pandemic, so we ended up going to Mississippi, which was one of the states which was open.
Yeah.
I mean, so in a way, it was kind of like, hey, we can't do them in New York, we can't do them in California where we are. So what can we find? And it kind of mandated us to end up in one of these red states, which kept working through the pandemic to some extent. So I think it was nice. The FDA was still available. They were always available to answer our questions. They were available outside of pre-subs as well. So in a way, it was nice to have that interaction. Now, ideally, we would have liked to meet them in person, but it worked out fine.
Yeah, no, it's neat. It's really neat to see our industry shift the way it did, and there was definitely challenges along the way, but really, really proud of our community that we were able to make figure out a way to just kind of make it the normal, and you just figure it out as you go. So congrats to you guys for being able to, not only move forward with product and clinical trials, but raise funding and things like that. Doing that remotely was pretty new to people.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, neuro42, it's been nice because we've done about 3 rounds of financing in about 13 months. So, there's been a lot of interest around what we're doing. Some of it is based on our past successes. Some of it is the market being so conducive to a new, innovative product and innovative platform. So in a way, we've had, I mean, it's every time we open up a round, it's been within 3 months, we're able to close it and oversubscribe it every time. And we brought in about $14 million in total financing, slightly over a year. So it's been nice to have that kind of buy-in from the investor community as well, where they see the innovative nature, but also how this could impact the field. And we're seeing a lot of buy-in from the corporate strategics as well, who are reaching out very early into this equation. I'll just let you know. I mean, there was a SPAC that reached out to us in December and gave us an acquisition offer in January. And I mean, come on, we're like pre-revenue, 2 years
Yeah.
out from revenue, and they wanted to buy it out because they believe there were so many synergies on the treatment side with potential targets that it could fit in very well. And
Wow.
so it took us about 10 days to say no to that deal because we have so much more to accomplish before we look at a SPAC or an acquisition today. But it was kind of very, very interesting because I mean, I've done several startups. You don't see that early in the game where people want to jump in within a year and a half of a company's formation and say, hey man, we just want to take it over because the early data is really cool. It's like a biotech
It's
play.
a huge compliment, but it's also very validating.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's when you see some validation from the corporate strategics that early into the game, we also see some validation from the community that's looking at acquiring and taking stuff public. Whether I believe in SPACs or not is a discussion for another day. Is very refreshing to see because in a way it shows that not just the technology is novel, but also the market and the solution we're creating has the value proposition for all stakeholders,
Right.
not just one, right? I mean, there's one where you want to reach out to the patients and provide the best care, but also provide the right value proposition for the providers and the physicians, and then also have an ROI model that makes sense to the investors and the corporate strategics as well. So if you can kind of, right, like you can kind of play in all those different stakeholder buckets, you create a pretty nice solution.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I would take that a step further, a value proposition for the hospitals too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because it's no longer just a discussion of, physician, Doctor Jones or Doctor Johnson decides he wants this device, we're going to buy it. The hospitals, playing an active role in that, and if you guys are in a situation where you can prevent, follow up procedures and things like that, you start calculating ROI on that. It
yeah,
doesn't take too long before the machine starts paying for itself and then some.
yeah,
In addition to just patient care, I wouldn't see this as when Intuitive first came out, it was kind of a lost leader for hospitals. They bought it and then they marketed the heck out of it, even though maybe they were just doing lap choles with it, right? But it was something that it was an investment and them putting a flag in the ground that we're going to be a futuristic hospital.
yeah,
And this doesn't sound like it's got that play. This is more of like, hey, we can actually bring you value today.
yeah.
Not today, but when you guys,
When we are in the market, yeah.
yeah, when you go to the market, you're going to be able to have a pretty strong value proposition. It sounds like. Let's shift to the company a little bit. Obviously, I mean, you can't talk about Neuro42 without talking about Promaxo. I mean, we've mentioned that several times in the conversation, just from the iteration and the lessons that you learned from that. But what was the, how did you get involved? Obviously, you're a co-founder. How did this whole thing come about? What was the genesis?
No, I mean, it's a very, very interesting story. So we got exposed to Dr. Larry Wald. I mean, he was a big name in the MRI space at MGH and Harvard Medical School and everything with Martineau Center. So, we met Larry about slightly over 3 years ago and started talking to him. Hey, Larry, we would like you to be an advisor, kind of help us because you've done some work in the low field side as well, along with the high field, and you've kind of built scanners for Siemens and all the other big guys. Uh, and I mean, he's a key opinion leader in this space. So as we started talking to Larry, he started getting pretty fascinated by everything we were doing and how we were positioning these devices as well, which was very different than the world had ever seen. Where, hey, we're positioning an MRI to do guidance, not just for traumatic brain injuries or like, hey, we're going to just do imaging for stroke management, which one of his, colleagues was kind of commercializing through Hyperfine. So Larry started getting very interested in this. He visited us a couple of times. We visited him. And then that started the discussion towards, hey, I have this amazing technology. Would you like to license it and create a new product around it and then commercialize it? So that created a big discussion among the Promaxo's board and among the conversation with partners and everything. And after a while, it became relevant where we wanted to bring in Larry, Clarissa, Jason, the inventors of the technology, as founders into a new entity. And Promaxo allowed us to do that, where we create a new entity, run with it, keep the teams independent so we can create value on both sides. And Promaxo did the early investment in it, took some equity stake, but allowed the company to not be part of, Promaxo's uh, product portfolio and where we were going with it. So in a way, we built a new team. We have 18 full-time employees at neuro42 now. We took new office space in San Francisco, allowed the company to remain independent of everything that Promaxo was doing, and allow it to run in parallel, which has allowed us to create value on both fronts. So I think it was a fair bit of negotiation and back and forth that took almost like 15 months to get to the right corporate structure. But what it did allow us to do once we did that, and we did that in August of 2020, things started moving very fast from there on.
So I'm going to ask you a question, um, and this is I've done a fair amount of writing on LinkedIn about this lately. It's really interesting. You know, I think it's pretty widely accepted that the head of commercial is typically the hardest hire a founder or a CEO can make. That's at least what the data says. And I think we're seeing a shifting in the tide of those commercial leaders being brought on much earlier. And I noticed you guys hired Rob Korn recently, which is a great hire. What was your thought process there? Because if you're let's call it end of 2023, beginning of 2024, before you're really going to be taking this thing potentially to market, that you made a commercial hire fairly far in advance, which I actually am in much in favor of, from the standpoint of allowing that individual to really be a part of product market fit, messaging, all of those different things. But can you share can you share what your thought process was there, and kind of maybe what your feelings are about involving the commercial leader that early on in the process?
Yeah, so actually we got Rob on the Promaxo side, but we were using him as an advisor on the Neuro42 side because of all his experience with neurointerventional commercialization piece. But one thing we are doing, and we're bringing a couple of other bigger names on the operations and commercialization side into Neuro42 as well, which you'll see over the next 3 to 4 months. We don't really look at timing as much as finding the right complementary skill sets, because these people who worked in startups are not just commercial leaders. They're also people who know how the product needs to be developed to take it to the end user. And you need to get that input ASAP. One thing is getting it from the surgeons, which we have big names like Mitch Berger and Lawtons and all that, who are going to provide us the input that we need. We're making a concerted effort to also get female neurosurgeons on board because it's a very different perspective they bring to the table as well. But also, it's nice to bring in people who've commercialized these products and faced the challenges that they've faced, whether it was with Emirates or with ClearPoint or with Hyperfine. and see how we could not repeat those things, right? If we can kind of get that incorporated early enough and make maybe even a couple of smaller changes in our product, which allows us to create this small edge over the competitive landscape, it's better to get that earlier than later once you build a product and you're taking it to market. So I think it's a concerted effort to do that. So when we're talking to recruiters, when we're talking to people, we're saying, hey, we want good talent to be available, and if it's available, it doesn't really matter what the title is. What it means is these guys have played in this space. They can contribute, they can complement what we know, and maybe help us get to that end goal a lot faster. And even if we say, let's say, a couple of months to 6 months on a commercial launch, I mean, you're looking at some significant inflection points, money spent, cash burn rate that could be impacted. So I think that's what it means. And if you look at the total cost of making that hire 6 months earlier, what the impact could be, it's not even comparable. So we don't really, so it's kind of like,
No, it's wise. I mean, it's there's huge wisdom in that. I've always kind of thought it interesting. People will say, "Oh, well, we don't want to hire that person because we're going to have the burn. They're going to increase our burn rate if we're not going to be ready to sell for another 18 months. We'll bring them on a couple months before we're ready to commercialize." And whatever it costs to have that person in place and have them have a seat at the table and be able to, if they can allow you to sidestep a couple of landmines, they pay for themselves.
yeah,
you know
multifold actually. It's.
yeah, exactly.
And what we also see is people who played in this space, especially in the startup space, they're not just commercial leaders who are doing, hey, I'm just doing downstream marketing and I'm just creating a sales force and kind of telling you what needs to be done. Uh, they have kind of created the early market. They know how this product fits in. And that early market development fits in into a business plan very early into the equation, because you need to understand how this market will evolve, how this is going to react to this product. That's why we also do primary market research studies very early into a company's formation. Rather than waiting, hey, we built the product, now let's do a market research study to see. That's not worthwhile. So this study was done just around when Promaxo was or neuro42 was founded, where we looked at, hey, what's the willingness to purchase this? Which procedures would neurosurgeons and neuroscientists focus on? And we spent money on that. We spent almost $180,000 on a study, which was conducted by a third party because, yeah, that's a lot of money for a startup. But I can tell you that that data is extremely valuable because you get about 400 slides of data that you can slice and dice to understand how this product needs to fit in into this specific marketplace. So I think it's a nice way to do it. Also, you do want input from the community guys. One thing we've learned over the years as we've commercialized multiple products is that KOLs are KOLs. I mean, they have different incentives to talk about you and work with you, and you need those, right? You need to publish with them, but they're not as commercially driven as a community guy would be. So you need to get that community input from a physician or a surgeon upfront as well, because that's your primary market you'll be selling into, not just the academic KOLs. So having the right mix of those advisors upfront is extremely critical.
Yeah. No, it's a very good point. Yeah, the KOLs are going to give you the reference point to be able to um, leverage their name in the marketplace once it becomes commercially available. The community physicians are really gonna make up the bulk of the sales.
Yeah.
And volume, because even a lot of these KOLs might not, because they're publishing, because they're advising and doing all these other things, they're not doing as many procedures as somebody working in a community hospital who's just got a thriving practice and is going to be able to drive significant revenue for a company.
Exactly. So when we do our primary market research studies, we intentionally force our partners to go to the community guys and get their input, because that's more valuable to see what their price sensitivity is, what's their willingness to purchase, what's the workflow they want to use this device in. Because when I sit with an academic KOL and say, hey, I'm going to use it for shunt insertions, and absolutely most of them say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. But when you go to a community guy, it always comes back with a question, okay, what's the time it's going to take? How much is it going to cost me? Do I have a reimbursement pathway? Or is it going to provide better care? And I think it's nice to get Doesn't mean the academic KOL should be discounted ever. I think they hold a significant place because that's your early market. That's what you publish through. That's what you create a nice, marketing playthrough as well. But at the end of the day, getting the community guys their input early enough into the equation is valuable. And we intentionally try to do that, whether it helps us or not. At least it gives us data points which then can help us in the long run.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. The institutions, academic institutions where these physicians, these KOLs work, they're going to buy the products because they have to keep the KOL happy because that's how he's built his reputation and his practice. Which brings huge value to those academic institutions. So they're probably going to buy it just because he says to, or she says to. But the community physician's got a different fight on his hands. And it's, there has to be either this day and age, you better either have a huge value proposition or better be able to, save the hospital a ton of money.
I mean, ideally, you want to play on both sides if you could, right? That
Right?
and I think it's kind of like always, if you can create some like minimal value proposition on both fronts, I think it creates a much easier commercialization play.
For
But
sure.
you're absolutely correct. I mean, either you need to make a big impact on the clinical outcomes, or any kind of digital health solution or data driven solution needs to create some efficiency play for the hospital.
Yeah. In short, what do you guys look for when you're hiring culture wise? I mean, is there, is there a couple things? I mean, obviously, industry experience, domain specific experience is always huge, but when you're looking for people and you're looking at the intangibles, what's the one or two things that are really important for the culture there at Neuro42?
Yeah, no, I think the most important thing is people should be able to work and be able to mentor the new guys who are coming in into the organization. They need to understand the startup mindset to some extent. I think that's more critical. You have to wear multiple hats at times. There is no real specific role for the first 4 years. Once you've started creating specific roles, you've already made it. That's how I look at it, right? Because if you are already hiring a person just for one job, then you're no longer a startup. At that point, you've already kind of executed a lot. So I think people should be open to doing things which are slightly beyond, and they should be able to work with younger guys, mentor them, bring the younger generation up to speed. Because a lot of people in Silicon Valley who we get in are right out of school at times as well. We're getting new MR scientists in who can contribute a fair bit as well. So it's kind of nice to have that. And then we're looking for people who are complementary in their skill set. We don't mind diversity of opinion. We want that, right? We don't want a group thing where everybody is like, oh yeah, what you're saying is awesome. Let's go ahead and do what you're doing.
Yeah.
We know that anyway, right? I mean, what's the idea? Why we're bringing you in is also because you know this market. You've kind of, like you said, you've kind of navigated those landmines that we don't know. So if you're doing something wrong, don't be shy in saying it out loud. And we'll absolutely entertain that because at the end of the day, there's no real ego here. Oh, I have this title, so I should be the one making the decision. Not really. And we keep hearing this, right? Leadership from below or leadership from wherever you are. People should be encouraged to say something. And if we bring in a leader from the industry, they should be open to listening to other people as well. You never know when a great
Yeah.
idea could come about. So I think having that collaborative mindset, being able to mentor, having diversity of opinion, all of that helps. And I think we're making a concerted effort to, bring that into Neuro42, and hopefully it builds a culture which fosters more innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the mentoring is it's a hot button right now because of so much of what's some of that's being lost in a lot of this remote work and whatnot. I mean, there's a lot to be said for that 5 or 10 minute conversation that happens outside the conference room after a meeting where a senior individual can mentor a junior early hire, early in their career, recent hire. Some of that stuff gets lost in the when people are working remote and they just don't have that happenstance meeting that might have happened around the water cooler or whatever. But yeah, we're hearing employee engagement and mentoring are two really, really hot buttons
Yeah.
right now as it relates to building small companies into big companies. What every every startup theoretically is in business to put themselves out of business someday because they want to either be acquired or go public or whatever it is. Certainly, the goal is that you want it to look a lot different 5 years from now than it does today. What in your from your perspective, what's the Valhalla here? What would you like to see happen with this company? Do you think it's something, a technology that eventually will be sold? Do you want to build the next GE out of it?
Hopefully not GE, but it doesn't. I mean, nothing wrong about GE. It's
Right.
just too big an organization, right?
Right.
That decision comes in, that fork comes in like 2 years out when we start making those decisions, whether it's a corporate acquisition, M&A pathway you're going with, or you're going and looking at an IPO 2 3 years out. I think for now it's all about executing and looking at what needs to be done over the next 6 months and next 12 months and next 24 months. We don't really look at the end goal too much. I think if we can make an impact, create a solution that gets used on patients, everything seems to work out. I don't think there are many companies that have succeeded that don't have both pathways available. And you'll always have both pathways available if you're doing well. Because a corporate strategic would like to jump in and you want to have this dual strategy and a dual thread of using a corporate strategic and then using that to do an IPO. So when we talk to the bankers and I talk to research analysts a lot and I sit with them all the time, I think it's about executing. I mean, people look at you, they see what your projections were. As long as you're within a quarter of doing what you told them that you were going to do, you create a lot of confidence among the whole community, whether it's the investment banking community on the IPO side, whether it's the analyst, whether it's the corporate strategics. I think that's the more important thing to focus on right now for us. I think all of the rest of the things tend to take care of themselves. And I mean, there's so many pathways that you could explore. You could always come back and say, I want to run this company forever, and like you said, be an Intuitive or be a GE or be a Philips. But I don't think those questions can be answered by me today because I don't even think I might be that person someday. They might have brought in somebody else. So I think for us, it's about focusing and getting to our first goal, which is an FDA clearance. Once we have that, then we start focusing on commercializing the product and then building the next products in pipeline, and then rest of the stuff tends to take care of itself.
Yeah, it's probably too early to say without knowing exactly, what the end product's going to be fully capable of.
But what we are seeing is we're already seeing, approaches from corporate strategics. We've had conversations with them since last year. So in a way, it's kind of nice to have that. One thing I've always learned is if you're a startup, just tend to give the Heisman for the longest time you can. You don't have to kind of jump in and start to have a conversation very early unless you have something you've proven. And once you start proving, people tend to reach out to you, and it's fine. You can sit back unless you absolutely need somebody, which we don't. Once we get to that stage, I think it'll be nice to see who is the right partner at what stage. Now, we already have a couple of corporate strategics invested in us from Asia. So, in a way, it's nice to have that, get them on the cap table early enough so that they're vested into the project as well. And then, we'll see. We probably will have one of the big corporate strategics from US or global corporate strategic into this over the next couple of rounds as well, whether it's over B or C. It's absolutely going to happen. And that's where it starts creating, hey, do we use them to scale us? And then does that create a pathway towards an M&A?
Yeah, yeah. Your market's an interesting one in that there's a ton of players in the
Yeah.
space at OUS. Especially Asia. I think there's a couple big players over in Asia. So you guys definitely have a lot of
I mean,
different.
the cool thing is on one side we have the imaging guys, on the other side we have the stereotactic navigation and the robotics guys. We play on both sides, right? So we
Right.
create the front end for a robotic company, we create the back end for a imaging company. So in a way, we're not restricted to one bucket of corporate strategics. And then finally on the data side, I mean, we have people who are playing on doing artificial intelligence based faster imaging, data analytics. So there's some synergies there as well. So I think we'll continue to talk to people, but as of now, as you know, there's already a couple of people who are investors in us. We'll see where we end up in the next couple of years.
That's great. I'm keeping track of time here. I want to be sensitive to that. But I guess one last question that I'd have is: is there, and you don't have to get specific, but is there anybody working on anything like this out there, or is being that you're kind of you're building this vertically integrated machine, I haven't heard of anybody doing anything very similar to it other than obviously Promaxo, but
I mean, we've started hearing Hyperfine with its new team is starting to bring robotics. I mean, they brought in Dave Scott. They brought in some really good people, right? So I'm sure they'll start exploring this. But like I said, we have a head start. And once
yep.
you start doing something, I'm sure there'll be a couple of startups that will come up. But you're absolutely correct. There's nothing really that far advanced as we are on the technology development side, where there's already images out and prototypes out, exploring both robotics and imaging together. Uh, but I mean, it's good to have more competition come into the field. We're not scared of competition. I think it's good because when you're creating a new market as well, you want a couple of players. And we always like to be one step ahead on innovation. While somebody is kind of exploring the MR, we take it to robotics. When somebody is exploring robotics, we're already exploring AI. And that's where we invest a lot of our resources on as well, is to get more intellectual property in place. I think that's valuable for us. Uh, and I think that creates a barrier as well for us to do things as we go into global markets. Also, our
Yeah.
partnerships in global markets, whether it's India, whether it's China, we have some of the big names who've come on invested in us. That always helps because, like you said, getting those commercial partners like the GVKs of the world, who are infrastructure players affiliated to Apollo hospitals, the Huamis, and the microports of the world. I think it's nice to have those guys as part of the ecosystem because they can provide you inputs about global markets that a startup can never get. I mean, it's just you can play as much as you want and spend as much as you want. You still can't get it because you don't have foot soldiers in that market. So
Right.
it's nice to have that buy-in from that community as well that early into the company's development.
Yeah. No, I mean the fact that you guys have had the interest from so many different levels is hugely validating, and like you said, competition usually is, especially if you're the first to market, competition is usually a very good thing because it validates what you guys are doing. If there's other people out there that have taken notice and said they're onto something, we need to get up to speed, it validates you.
Also creates the right pathway for M&A, right? Because if you're the only player, I mean, yeah, you're going to see a lot of guys jump in, but you also want to see, hey, there is a market that people want to jump in and explore. And I think it's nice to have that kind of validation from the market as well. Hey, these guys are onto something. And that's why, I mean, we're seeing all this inbound inquiries from VCs and strategics and, like some of these infrastructure players as well. I think it's nice within a year and a half of a company's formation if you already have them on our
It's
platform.
unbelievable.
Yeah, it's you just have to keep executing, like I keep saying. The thing that can help us the most is to get to the next milestone and the next milestone. And we told our investors we're gonna have the robot license in by the end of the year. It took us another 3 months, but we got it in March, and that's a big validation as well that these guys are not just talking about a robot. They're kind of gonna build it. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think it's because they can come and see the MRI right now, but they just can't see the robot now. They can see it as well. I think all of that is important to show the progression of the product pipeline as well.
No, that's fantastic. I want to be yeah, obviously I want to get you out of here and keep you on schedule. But I part of the purpose of putting this show together was to give you guys the spotlight to be able to allow people to see what you guys are doing, see what a cool technology you guys have, but also, if people are interested in getting involved, whether it's from a recruiting perspective, people want to,
Yeah.
are interested in the company, or, if it's, M&A interest, VC interest, whatever it is, how can people, what's the best way for people to reach out if there is interest in the company? Is it through the website or best way?
Anything and everything. I mean, all of us have significant LinkedIn profiles and or significant LinkedIn presence. We're very active. Reach out on the website. You can email us. You can reach out on LinkedIn. Uh, I think either way is fine. We're pretty responsive.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I mean, like I said, we're always looking for the right talent to help us. We're looking for the right people to help us. we're looking for the right investors as well who could take us to the next level. So it's always nice to have a conversation. Whether it takes it anywhere or not is something that you can't decide beforehand. But what you can start with uh, is some nice discussions around how this fits in into everything.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'll make sure we get your guys' contact information in the show notes. Just wanted to say thank you again, Amit. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know the audience is going to really enjoy this episode. The technology you guys are building is nothing short of amazing. I can't wait to see it be iterated upon and ultimately in the market and helping a ton of patients in the process. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll wish you guys nothing but success moving forward, and we'll hope to stay in touch.
No, thanks, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to be on this podcast with you as well. So I enjoyed the discussion, actually, really insightful questions. So hopefully it gives the answers to anybody who listens to this as well, and creates a nice, discussion, a few discussion topics as well.
Absolutely. Well, that's it, folks. We'll hope to join us on the next episode of The Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time.